Well, it's been a minute. I know I have not posted a video in a month, and there are some updates in life that I've been dealing with. Nothing too major, but it's just been not a fun month. I had bronchitis for 2 weeks, so I knew anytime I sat down to record a video that I was risking losing my voice entirely. I usually have to talk for about 20-30 minutes to do these, and that is a lot when you're dealing with bronchitis. I also got a COVID test, COVID-free, which is awesome. But when you are dealing with a bad cough during a pandemic, it is not fun. Then, as soon as the bronchitis was resolved, my dog got attacked by a pit bull. He is okay. This was Luke, the smallest dog. He is doing much better now. He had a cone for about a week to prevent himself from licking the parts of him that were injured, but he didn't need stitches. It could have been a lot worse. He has some swelling in his stomach as well. It seems like it's where the teeth hit him. So he's just took some medicine for that. It seems like he's doing a lot better across the board. So that is where I've been for the last month. Victoria and I have been doing some exciting new updates as well. Hopefully we'll have some news soon. We still have a postponed wedding to a indefinite date, but we have some other exciting changes coming, and hopefully some news on that soon. In the meantime, I'm gonna go ahead and do a video. Your story has rules, whether you realize it or not. There are certain things that you are going to include and certain things that you aren't. There are certain things you're going to approach in specific ways and other things that you're going to avoid. And it's different than your world having rules. We'll talk about that next week. This is a story, has rules, has restrictions, lines you may not want to cross. Things like animal injury, because that is a thing that happened to me in my life 2 weeks ago, and it's not fun. It's not enjoyable. I didn't like it. It's not something that I wouldn't put in a story, but I would not do something cruel to an animal, I'd like to think. For example, I think potentially I would write a story where an animal is injured in some way, as long as the animal is ultimately okay. I would not be the guy to write John Wick. I'm comfortable with things happening to animals up to a point, and then there is a line. My line is probably further than other people's. I know some people don't even want to hear about animal injury or cruelty, and that is very understandable. I think there is a line as well where I don't like it to be graphic in any meaningful way. For example, if I were to hear that a bird was injured or killed, that is different than a puppy. There are restrictions that you're going to make as a writer, certain things that you're going to do and you're not going to do regarding anything involving violence. Regarding violence, how violent is your story going to be? I'm telling a superhero story, so violence is a part of it. I'm telling a story with teenagers, young people, so technically it is violence against children. I think that it is removed enough from that real world version of violence against children that I don't think it crosses any lines, any boundaries. But again, someone would have their own limits there. I'm certainly not writing It by Stephen King, or even, I'd say Stranger Things is actually probably a closer analog, because Stranger Things is fairly harmless, or it's relatively superficial injuries. I would not be interested in writing something where anything more than a bone gets broken for a child. What about assault or sexual assault? I am not writing any. That is something that I do not feel I am qualified to do, that it is appropriate for me to do. That is not my avenue. If someone else feels compelled to write about it, if they feel they have something intelligent or emotionally honest or cogent to say on the subject that has not been depicted anywhere else, by all means, do your thing, write your story. I just know that I am not the guy who is going to bring anything new to the table, let alone am I going to feel that I'm adding anything to the narrative about sexual violence in fiction. It's just not something I feel comfortable doing. But this isn't even about things that are crossing a line into taboos or crimes, such as animal abuse or sexual assault. What about just sex? Is there sex in your story? If you were to watch Star Wars and all of a sudden two people were physically intimate, even if they were consenting adults, it would feel very strange. It would feel very out of place. Same thing with Marvel, actually. You realize that there has not been a sex scene in a Marvel movie. The closest that we've gotten were two people lying on a bed together, clearly about to engage in sex, in 2008. Iron Man and the Incredible Hulk. That's the last time anyone lay on a bed together with the intention of smooching in a Marvel film. And that is a deliberate choice. Those are very chaste films. I am writing stories about teenagers, so I am not comfortable writing about sexual content in their case. That does not mean that you can't. If you are telling a story about that experience, about that process, that is your choice to do, and you can write about it however you want to, but that's not something I feel comfortable doing with teenage characters. When I'm writing about adults, and it is not a book targeted to teens, I feel more comfortable going to places where there is more intimacy and more nudity and more carnal acts. But again, this is the tone of your story. This is the rule that you're setting. It's helpful to determine these rules before you start writing. Some of these you will just realize as you're writing. Some of them you will write something, you'll realize it feels out of place, or it's too far and you need to pull it back. That happened to me with the superhero novel. The first draft, I think there were much more injuries to the kids at the end of the book, and I think I pulled back how badly hurt they were after the climax, because it just felt like I was going too far. It felt cruel at a certain point. But that is a question of how cruel do you want the story to feel? You know, how common is death? If you look at something like Star Wars, every on-screen death serves a purpose. Or, more accurately, once a character no longer serves a purpose, they are viable for on-screen death. Once Obi-Wan has filled his role as a mentor and passed along relevant information to Luke, his death can occur. Once Yoda has passed along the last of the relevant information he has, or rather the last of the information except for the info dump that Obi-Wan gives right after, Yoda is allowed to die. Once Boba Fett has gotten Han Solo to Jabba, and once he's been in a fight with Luke Skywalker, at least briefly, he is absolutely fair game to die. And as far as I'm concerned, that's probably the best thing for him. We'll see. I know he's probably coming back in The Mandalorian. It's fine. If he does, fine, but I just don't care about Boba Fett. Y'all, he served his purpose. He got Han Solo to Jabba. He has fulfilled his role. Rogue One is all about that. Every time a character performs the last action they need to do in Rogue One, they are killed off. And yes, I know because the last action is always what someone does right before they die, but they all have a role to fill, and then once they do their job, once they do their gig part of the heist, they die. That also tells us that this is a world where people can die, and main characters can die, but only if they have no major unfinished business. The television show Lost worked a very similar way for at least the first 2 seasons, where once somebody had a story that we saw the last really relevant elements of their backstory, and we knew what had brought them to the island and what they were working through, and then we got to see them work through it and become a better person, they then died. Or rather, that was something that happened to characters right before they died because they wanted to wrap up everything and resolve the character. That was what led to the disproven and wrong theory that this was purgatory, that the island was giving them a chance to test themselves and to go through everything again, and then once they'd made the right choice, they could then move on and ascend or pass on to heaven or hell. That is not what that show was about. It's not what that show was about. Please stop saying it was purgatory, because it wasn't. But that was their approach to death for the first 2 seasons, roughly. These are not hard and fast rules necessarily. You can break your own rules as the story goes on. Certainly, Harrison Ford advocated for Han Solo to die, but he did not die in those films because he was a main character. And main characters in the Star Wars trilogy do not die. They are immune to death. Obi-Wan can die because Obi-Wan is the exception. He is the mentor. The robots can die because you can put them back together. But Han Solo, he lives. Luke lives. Leia lives. Vader can die because he redeems himself. His story concludes. He is resolved. Now, once you get to the prequels, that's no longer true. Mace Windu is as important as anyone in that franchise is. He's an important side character, and he is incredibly murdered. He is radically and wildly murdered in a way that feels out of character for the story. All of the deaths in Star Wars generally are quick, they're unceremonial, and there's not a lot of fanfare about them. Boba Fett dies by accident. The Emperor gets the most dramatic death. He's thrown into a pit while being electrocuted, but most people, they blow up, or they get shot, or they get stabbed. Mace Windu gets his hand cut off, he gets electrocuted, and he gets thrown out a window. That is a lot. A lot happens to that guy, and I don't know why. It feels like a Quentin Tarantino death in the middle of a Star Wars movie, and it feels out of character. In a way, it feels almost cruel or ceremonial, but I don't think Mace Windu deserves that death. And that's a question you have to ask when you're dealing with death in fiction, which really the whole video, I could do a whole video just about death. Do characters die because they deserve to, or to show that they don't deserve it? The Jurassic Park movies, up to a point, people who die because they have made bad choices. Either they did stupid things or cowardly things, or they were arrogant. That's the biggest one. Usually they think they're arrogant. Then you get to Jurassic World, and the woman who is perfectly nice and perfectly reasonable and is helping out the children and taking them on the tour is brutally murdered. I mean, PG-13, brutally murdered, but still brutally murdered. And she did nothing to deserve it. Now, not everyone deserves to die. Certainly if you go to horror movies, people die in that all the time who don't deserve to. Maybe they do, it depends on the horror movie, but generally they are victims. And that is not generally the approach that Jurassic Park takes, especially not in broad daylight, in a tourist trap. Like it feels so out of character for that franchise. And it's cruel, and it's needlessly cruel. And people felt taken out of the story because it felt like they had broken the cardinal rules of the story. Usually arrogance is the main factor in you getting killed. There are a few innocent people who are attacked, but usually they survive. She was an innocent person, and she died, and that really bothered people. You can also have rules about cussing. Do you want to depict cursing in your story? I don't for the superhero novels, because these are books intended for a younger audience. So I will have very, very minor cursing, or I will mostly just say, so-and-so cursed, or so-and-so muttered something foul under their breath, that kind of thing. So I'm not actually using any of the words that are something I don't want to represent in the actual fiction, but the characters are still able to curse as they would like to. You as the author have control over how much you show. You know, people in your world certainly have sex, otherwise you're writing a story about people who reproduce asexually, but if they do, you may not show it, and that's absolutely fine. You are responsible for determining how your story represents the world. Next week, we're going to do a video about the rules of your world, which are different than the rules of your story. Until then, thank you for watching the video. That's all I have today. If you enjoyed it, leave me a like and a comment, and ring the bell and subscribe, because those are all the things that you do on YouTube to let me know that you're engaging with it. And after I just took a 4-week hiatus, or a 5-week hiatus, I don't even know, it would be nice to get some engagement back and potentially get the numbers back up. Thank you so much for watching. I love you, Victoria.